All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming to join us. My name is Tony Hollinger, and I am the Director of Military Affiliate Support and Special Initiatives at the Office of Campus Life. And I'm very glad to have you all here with us for this session, engaging veterans on campus to tremendous possibilities and solvable challenges. Is that who everyone expected to be?
No, I'm sorry.
That's why you're boxed in. You can't go anywhere. We've got a great group here with us, and so what I'm going to do, I'm just going to kind of quickly introduce our panelists here because we got a nice cozy crowd here. We've got some slides that are really just going to be more backdrop. We really want this to be an interactive session. We are meeting each other really for the first time in some ways and sharing our ideas about our affiliation with being veterans or supporting veterans. So part of what you're going to see is a dynamic of us also sharing ideas and commenting on each other's ideas. So just to start, so our first veteran on the panel here in the white shirt, Mr. Daniel Gage. He's an Army veteran and he's a professorial lecturer with SPA. This is what came off of the website.
Perfect.
All right. And here I am Tony Holland, as I mentioned, and here we have Patrick Malone, who is a Navy veteran. He's also with SPA, and he's the director of the Key Executive Leadership Program.
Army guys, sorry about that football game this year. What can I say? Oh, good. Okay, yeah.
And so I came up with the term here because we've also got some folks here with us who I just said veteran allies because as a veteran they are truly friends. So we do have Sean Bates here who's with SIS and his title is assistant professor. Next to him we have Tara Gargano, who's a professional lecturer and director of online programs for SIS. And one person who's hiding in the crowd but is part of our group here is Brian Rowe. Brian is the Assistant Director of the Career Center for Experiential Education, so he'll be chiming in as well. Right.
So when you get here late, you don't have to sit up front.
I think he came and hid his name tag, so he wouldn't have to be here. But so since we got a pretty cozy crowd, one thing I like to do is if we could, so we know who you are, if we could just get you to introduce yourselves and just if you have any military or veteran affiliation, whatever that is, if we could kind of quickly do that, we can all have a sense of who we are. Fantastic. Well, again, it's better than I anticipated in terms of the relevancy of the topic. But one of the reasons I did say we wanted to have this session was to kind of start the conversation about this connection we have that a lot of times we're not aware of. So thank you all for sharing that. I'm glad you're here. What I'll start with is just some of the statistics on our military affiliate students here. And we got a couple of slides we're going to go through, and then we'll get to really more of the discussion topic. Hopefully you all can see that, but I'll just kind of give you an idea. What it shows here on the top is the military affiliate students we have, not including the ROTC. So the first line is the student veterans, and I just got numbers here for 2017, 2018, and 2018, 2019 to be representative. So in 2017, 2018, we had 164 student veterans here. In 2018, 19, 158. We have another category of the dependents of veterans who can also come and use their GI Bill benefits. And in 2017-18, we had 114 of that group, and it went up to 133 in 2018-19. We also have active duty members. We had 29 in 17-18, and it went up to 55 in 18-19. We have a reserve category, not counting the National Guard as they stand alone. And that group was 29 in 17-18 and 23 in 18-19. National Guard, we had a big year, relatively big year in 2017-18 with 29, and then it dropped down to 7 in 18-19, not sure why. We also have a good contingent of ROTC students here, and I don't have the numbers yet for that group. And again, I want to point out part of why this session is important is because this is information AU needs to have. So I'm working on grabbing it and getting it so we can really have a picture of who's here and how we can effectively engage them. What I can tell you all is that for the last 2 years, AU has actually had the largest number of Army ROTC students in the DC area. The group is based at Georgetown, but for some reason the largest number of Army ROTC students enroll at AU. The Air Force program is based at Howard University, and we've got a solid number of those as well. But again, and to characterize these numbers, these numbers are based on little, if any, actual sort of engagement, recruitment, promotion for AU. So when you think about it that way, these are very solid numbers compared to others in DC. But the point of it all is that as we see the affiliation and affinity we all at the campus has, we want to encourage more military affiliate students to come and be a part of our community. Okay, this breakout just shows by school. Again, sorry, I apologize for the incomplete information, but just showing you what I have. So in 2018-19, we had the largest number of students in SIS, 139. Then came CAS with 60. The Kodak Business School had 59. SPA 52. Law School 34. SOC 25. Specs had 6, and School of Education had 1. Again, at this point, I can't speak to the effort made by any of the schools to particularly go reach out to attract military affiliate students. I can tell you it's certainly not anything of great magnitude, but again, these are just solid numbers representing the standing association that AU has with military affiliate students. Any questions on either of those before I move forward?
Just one, on the previous slide, do you have any sense of what say a 5-year trend is, or 10-year trend, or anything like that, in terms of, not the RTC, but the
I don't.
And active duty?
Right, so I don't have that right now. I'm kind of grabbing numbers. Most of the data for this really resides with our AU Central group, because the way we track the military affiliate folks most directly is through the GI Bill, the usage of the GI Bill. So that is where the information is like. Now, there has been some sensitivity, understandably, with kind of putting that information out broadly over the years, because the idea of, again, making sure the military students, that they want to self-identify that way, to allow them to do it. But the leaning has been to say, just because they are using those benefits to come to the school, we don't necessarily want to promote that. But now, as we're looking at engaging and supporting them better, we're really looking at making sure we get those numbers and track them so that we can.
Because just anecdotally, I haven't noticed either going up or down, but that's all anecdotal.
Right. And again, it's kind of one of those things, right? There's enough happening here, whether it be through alumni, et cetera, for there to be a draw. But like you said, what are we doing things as good as we can? Is there anything that is preventing us from going up? That's exactly what we're trying to prompt the discussion of. So, but the next time you see us, we'll have that information.
Tony, can I interrupt for just 1 second?
Absolutely.
So the number for SIS, the 139, I just wanted to remark, as a director of online grad programs in SIS, 40% of our student population are military affiliated students. I don't know how much of that accounts for the number that you have there, but I think that might attribute a little bit to the overwhelmingly disproportionate number of students that find themselves in SIS.
I was wondering if that had any impact on SPA members as well for our online program.
Yeah. Sonia, do you know if the percentage of folks in the online that are military by chance?
I don't.
Or they may not report.
It's like
Yeah.
It's a rough guess would be 10 and so 15 at a time.
Yeah.
Out of 150 would be sort of my, if I
Okay.
had
Yeah,
round
yeah.
number.
Yeah.
So I was actually interested in wondering if maybe part of the what did you have on your previous slide, might be attributable to, on, like, the increase in active duty might be attributable to the online program, which allows them to attend what, like, we have students in our classes who are literally stationed someplace, you know, in active duty. So that may be where that increase comes from.
Well,
And
again,
our students log on from 16 different time zones as well, right?
Yeah,
So they have an opportunity to be out in the field doing their work, and they still contribute to the courses and information.
again, what I can say is I'm very glad I pushed to have this session this year, because these are all the good points that we all need to come together and figure out where the information is, figure out who's got what, what approach that works. So these are all good questions that we'll look to follow up on. Thanks for pointing that out, Tara. Okay, just a little bit more context. We actually do have a couple other folks. Well, our current Vice President Athletic Director, Billy Walker, is a graduate of the Air Force Academy, so he's also a retired Brigadier General, so another veteran here on campus. And again, just to point out that we are really getting strong support from President Burwell, Provost Myers, and my boss, Dr. Ov, to really make sure we embrace this group and figure out how we can better support our military affiliate students. But again, and I'll kind of speak a little bit more. We are kind of talking about students specifically here, but the faculty and staff who are the ones who we actually do the work. The better we are connected and supported, I feel the better we can serve our students. So. Okay, now we're going to get into really the meat of this thing. We decided that the way we wanted to approach it was we kind of came up with 4 major topics that we thought would be areas we could all share some perspective on, but again, also want to get you guys questions or thoughts on it. So those 4 topics are: one, is the fact that veterans really are a microcosm of society. So we're a diverse group. We're not, it's not monolithic in any big way at all. So that's one thing we want to talk about. 2, we want to make sure that we all know a lot of stereotypes out there. Kind of relates to number 1. But we just have to make sure people aren't buying into stereotypes about veterans. Again, some good, some not so good. The third thing, which Tara brought up, particularly with her online work and other things, was that one thing we have to do is to help student veterans really realize that there's a difference between some of the training they received to kind of train for perfect and precise execution, versus being in an environment where the teaching and learning is really the mission. And so that was a great thing. We want to talk a little bit about how to do that. One of the final things is, again, talking about non-traditional students coming. We realize that student veterans may mature, may have families. They are really living and learning simultaneously, and so we know that there are some time management challenges that are associated with that again. So we just want to talk about that a little bit. One thing you see here, there's an overarching question that we all said as we talk about this, we all need to be thinking about, and that is, what has AU done, what is AU doing, and what should AU do to enable faculty and staff to best support student veteran success. So that's our kind of overarching thing. Okay, and now we're going to jump into our first topic, and we're going to have the person who sees a lot of students come through his executive leadership program talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the way we decided to do this is each of us are going to kind of take the primary lead to just bring up some points, and then the whole panel will chime in and we can all talk about things. But just in terms of the microcosm argument about the veterans, I went and I looked at some data that was provided by the Pew Research Group last June, and the military overall is still predominantly white, about 60%. White. But much like in society, you see all different faiths, of course, all different kinds of economic backgrounds. There's a tremendous amount of diversity, even with the 60% white, a lot of diversity in culture and the other 40%. So you have people from a lot of different backgrounds that are coming in. Largely male, but women have made a lot of inroads and had more success in the military in recent years. So in some ways, and the services have grown older. They're terribly, most of the students that you're going to find that come from that are veterans are very well educated before they even come here. The amount of training offered by the branches of the services that starts from the very beginning is significant. And for those without military backgrounds, I mean, all three armed services and World 4, kind of the Marine Corps, all of them, put a lot of effort on development and training very early on from the beginning. The officers tend to be better educated, higher degrees, but it's not unusual at all to see enlisted with multiple master's degrees. And I was in the healthcare field, and for me, many of our enlisted were carrying master's degrees before, and some officers weren't. So that's another thing that I think that you see. But I think in terms of, for our purposes, that when we see veterans in our classrooms and online, the idea being that these are people that are from the people, they're supposed to be the people that serve us, they're the people that are supposed to be a microcosm of the people they serve. There are some areas where we need a lot of work in that regard in terms of the composition of the veteran community or of the active duty community, but by and large, these are, like Tony said, this is a microcosm of the society that we serve. So any other comments from folks that paneled that
I would just say with regards to education specifically, when we're thinking about diversity and inclusion and talking about this population in general, there's a lot of ways that they can also have specific learning disabilities or other challenges that might directly affect their performance or ability to conduct some of the work that we're asking them to in the classroom. So outside of just the diversity of the demographics, I would be cognizant of other ways that we can think about them as a diverse group, in that they probably mirror in many ways some of the other issues we're addressing in an attempt to be inclusive on campus. So for example, if there might be a student who has dysgraphia or dyslexia, or someone who might have something else that impacts their learning in the classroom. So since we're speaking specifically about education, I would want to include that in any conversation about diversity of this particular group.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And the other thing that reminded me, many families, and I dealt with a lot of these when I was in the Navy, have children with special needs. And that is something, as any of us know that have family members or friends or children or parents with special needs, that's a big draw on energy and time and resources. Fortunately, in many cases, the military has done a really good job of supporting those families. And we had a program in the Navy called the Exceptional Family Member Program. So the way that you were set up for orders, where you went, how it was processed, was all your family members were taken into account. And that's another issue I think that we see in terms of the community that we're serving. Anything else?
I would like to speak of a particular aspect of this that's important. So, to Patrick's point, again, kind of looking at the large numbers, 6%, right? I'm daily and regularly surprised at the number of African American veterans who, again, I'm not necessarily aware that people are veterans, but once you kind of start talking about it, right? I mean, again, there is just a large number of people within the African American community who have served, and again, that number is just bigger than I anticipated, whatever it is. So I think there are two opportunities, because to the points we've made, yes, veterans are a microcosm because we reflect all society, all community. So it's not a reason to kind of think about, okay, well, again, veterans have more of this or that. But no, we need to think about them as whole people. The other thing, though, is I believe that as we talk about trying to make positive connections with members of minority or communities of color, that those individuals who have decided to serve for whatever reason they've decided, it does present a positive connection. Again, if they've had a positive experience, they've decided to serve and they've had a positive experience. Whether it's in the community or on a campus, it presents a very real and tangible opportunity to say, yes, we recognize you for who you are, and we also, part of the diversity you bring is that you have served as a military service member, but yes, you're also part of the diversity of the community. And I think that could have two benefits. One is for the AU community, but speaking personally, I think that outreach specifically could really connect with members of the minority community who are kind of out there and looking for opportunities and dimensions upon which to connect. So the more conscious we are about looking at veterans as a diverse group, I think we will help them find ways to step up, and also everyone will benefit from it. So just wanted to share that. Okay. All right, so any other comments or questions about diversity? Oh, yeah.
Well, I went to a seminar last night. This is my 5th term this spring semester, but spotlighting is a big issue, and no one particularly wants to be focused on if you're the only African American or Asian American in the room speaking for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
So this question of, and I didn't know until the woman self-identified in one of my classes. I didn't ask her because I mentioned my parents and my brother and my sister-in-law, but she'd been in the Marines. So the point is, would it not be their decision and me to just create, so to speak, the space that if they want to do this or not do this, or that, because I'm aware of not doing that to people. Now, once she knew that, she gave a great talk about a day in the Marine Corps, which was very helpful by comparison to a day on campus. But she was very good. So I don't know how to stay away from that. But you say recognize, where do you draw the line?
I think my comments will actually go to that when it's time for me to.
Okay.
Oh,
Yep.
okay.
And but again,
A little bit.
Yep, in direct response to again, that's part of what I'm saying. We have the benefit and opportunity to do here, because that's a great question. In a classroom, what are the dynamics? I don't know. But if we can go a little bit too much and be like, well, I don't want to necessarily be aware or try to think about people's identities because of the negative impact it could have. I'm just suggesting that's the idea, that if we create an environment where everyone, whatever that identity is, feels comfortable. Again, I know there are more positive things we can get from student veterans who feel inclined to participate and identify than the challenges of those. But you're right, it's not, nothing's cookie cut or whatever. This is to stimulate that and for us to share ideas.
Good.
So those of us who have been in academia for a while, I think, notice that every year you're a year older, but the freshmen are the same age, right? Veterans, by their nature, are not going to be representative of the other students who are on campus. They tend to look more like society at large, whereas incoming freshmen straight out of high school tend to be a little more symmetrical.
Mm-hmm.
That can cause some friction sometimes, and I wonder if you can speak to that.
Well, again, in my staff role, what I can only say is I have a sense of the validity of what you're saying, the degree to which, I guess I could say this. Some student veterans will look at that as a friction. Some will look at it as, again, there's something I bring here, a level of maturity, a level of perspective that I know I have, and there's a confidence I have in approaching classes.
But when you have that confidence and security, and the people who are around you maybe do not, then there can be some
and so again, in that case, it would be a response, right? So what I'm saying is that in that case, right, let's talk to the student investors about, hey, we're glad you're here, and so how can you help? How can you help show what mature interaction and learning looks like? Because you're right, if the confidence comes off as I know it all, or arrogant, or whatever, you're right. We want to find a balance, but that's identifying that friction, and then understanding it to the point of saying, okay, now that we understand it, we acknowledge it's there. Now that we understand it, let's figure out how we can make it a positive environment for all.
Can I offer another angle on that too? Because in the graduate courses that we have online, that age difference is not as evident because they're all graduate, but I still see that friction and we've still had to deal with it. So we have students do group projects in some classes, and sometimes the military affiliated students and civilian students are paired together. And because they have boots on the ground, because they have that firsthand experience, often a civilian perspective is not considered or weighted as much as someone who has maybe been in a situation, that they have firsthand knowledge of what they're researching or exploring. So even then, even though it's not a, the difference that you're talking about in physical appearance or years, I still see that as a tension that manifests in our classrooms in the graduate students that work together in groups, right? So oftentimes civilian ideas are bowled right over, not considered as important, if you will, as some of the military affiliated students. And so that's a dynamic that we still work to negotiate too. So I don't know that it's just on campus, but I feel like it resonates with different levels of education and different student bodies too. So I think it's definitely an important observation.
And Tara, how do you sort of
Yeah.
frame that? How do you right?
Yeah.
You know that it could happen.
Right.
So how do you kind of communicate?
We work with the faculty. I work with the faculty who
Yeah.
teach for us to kind of say, here's our demographics.
Mhm.
Here's some things we've historically learned from. Here's some suggestions or tips or ideas
Okay.
to help you kind of navigate those conversations.
Right.
So as the director and faculty advisor for the program, I try to serve as a resource for the faculty.
So-
I don't always have the answers, and sometimes we're kind of figuring out together because each instance is a little different. But we do have certain guidelines that we share with faculty based on not necessarily literature that's out there, but instances we found ourselves
Yeah.
having to deal with in recent years.
Okay.
I've actually seen the opposite of what
Really?
you've seen in my classroom. So I do graduate students only. What I've seen is graduate students in my classroom dismiss the veteran. Because most of the grad students in SPA, those that are on, not online, but in the classrooms, come from federal agencies. So they may be at the EPA, they may be working on Capitol Hill. And their thing, and it's rare when I see it, but I have seen where someone from working at a federal agency, say the IRS or Office of Personnel Management, you don't really get this, you were just in the military. It's not the real public service, it's the military. And so and I actually experienced that as a veteran here as a student a number of years ago. It has changed quite a bit, I think, campus-wide. But so I've seen, it's interesting, I think I've seen the other side of that argument as well.
So I want to chime in because I'm primarily where I've seen my military students has been in the undergraduate context, where I do see some of the dismissal, or not even necessarily the dismissal, but that sort of confidence. We can all be very honest that there is a significant population of people, of students at American University who already have confidence covered. And I have
With varying levels of
actual knowledge or expertise. And I've had both reactions from my military students where they're like, oh my God, and they just dismiss that whole group. But that unfortunately has meant they sort of checked out. And then I've got the couple of the former special forces who said, we're not having that, and engaging with the students, which we were able to manage in the classroom to become a constructive dialogue. And it was we need to look at what are the different experiences of these groups. One of you is 32 years old and has done 3 tours in Iraq. And one of you is 18. But 18 with some really interesting ideas and showing them how they can work together. And that has been very beneficial, but it is difficult to navigate. And I've seen some of those veteran students who were coming into the classroom and saying, I haven't been in a formal education environment in a decade. And they're very nervous about, these kids know how to take a test. And I can go do other things, but I haven't had to take a test. And I don't know, and is my paper okay? And I was like, we can work on that. And in fact, why don't we use that as the commonality? They can give you some comments on writing the paper, and you can tell them that theory is crap, but that when you actually have to put stuff on the ground, it's not going to work.
Back there, you have a question? In the back.
So I've seen a little bit of that, what you said. The way I look at it, both groups are a little bit at fault. Right? The veterans, I feel, have somewhat of a chip on their shoulder. Right? I earned my right to be here. I've already sacrificed and done all that to be here, as opposed to you just do what you have to do in high school and just straight to college and you're having fun, so it's a different experience. And for the civilians, I don't want to speak to them, but the way I got the sense is that as soon as you voice something, especially which does not align with the liberal views that AU, a majority of AU holds, you're automatically deemed, oh, you're just brainwashed. You know, like as if like your service is like you're just a talking point to for the right wing, or even like recently somebody said you're a Trumpist or something. So our views are
No, again, I want to remind everyone that I'm so glad Alizar's here, because he, as he mentioned, is the current president of our Student Veterans of America chapter here, and that's actually why I kind of put these things up, just to remind me to talk about some of the other resources we have. So Alizar is the head of our Student Veterans of America chapter here at AU. Part of what we realize is that, as he said, the students have got to have a perspective on how they participate in this environment and understand what they bring in some of these challenges. And Student Veterans of America is a great way of doing that. So this is about us all coming at it from our own angles. And one of the reasons I'm appreciating being in higher ed, although I never imagined myself in this environment, is because unlike a business environment where it really is, oh, you're just kind of doing this and whatever the operations are. In this environment, the goal is teaching and learning. And that means that we should be, right? It shouldn't be, oh, it's a challenge talking to you or understanding you or think. No, that's the point. The point, right, is that we're here to learn and grow. So hopefully that puts us we have some opportunity to lean into that. I just want to
Can I suggest we plow through the prepared comments and then open the aperture for all these questions to be sort of in the milieu?
They're kind of related.
Yeah, they're all related.
Yes, just one thing specifically as related to what Sean is. Again, for me, my learning experience as a student veteran, I went from the Marine Corps into the business school environment. I went into an environment where, yes, there were people from Wall Street and consulting, people who were very knowledgeable and experienced in their own way, who really looked at me and were like, okay, yeah, you've done some things, but I literally almost kept banging my head against the wall until I realized that my opportunity was to go into an environment like that and be a sponge, right? So we were talking about a case or something that they did know about or were better at. Rather than me being jealous or angry, oh, they've got some advantage, I said, no, that's great. Tell me about what it is that you've done and and because I want to learn it. And guess what? When there will be things that I can speak to. And I mentioned that because it was very much, in my mind, it was a perspective I had to develop. That's what I'm talking about, is a perspective we can try to share with other students. Is the idea that everyone brings different things to the table. How you approach your learning is going to make a world of difference. No matter what you are, veteran, fresh from high school, whatever, it is your mindset. So I just wanted to share that based on this relevancy. Okay, next, all the things we've been talking about somehow relate to, potentially a stereotype or two, and Dan's going to speak to that topic.
Great, sure, yeah. So I'm Daniel Gabe, and today is a special day for me. So today is the 15th anniversary of the second time I was wounded in combat and lost my right leg at the hip. So today's what's called my live day, so I thought it was cool that this was
all right.
Glad to be here. But it's interesting, so that, although that sort of moment, that season in time definitely shaped me in some ways, it actually opened up a whole bunch of very interesting opportunities for me in terms of this presentation, and here's why. I've written extensively on this question, which I'm just going to throw out a couple of ideas and then we'll proceed from there. But I've written extensively on the veterans' disability system. So we have a major problem in the United States right now, where about 50% of veterans who leave the military, the 250,000 a year who exit the military, about 50% of them apply for and receive some kind of disability compensation. Now, in a classroom perspective, it's important to know that a disability rating from the VA in no way is analogous to actually being a person with a disability. The two are radically different. So there are a variety of things you can get VA disability compensation for, which are not disabling conditions, but are more like conditions. So if you've ever had a bout of depression, if you've ever broken a bone, if you've ever had a knee surgery, those would all result in lifelong compensation from the VA if it happened on active duty. Now, I've written extensively on this, I'll just leave that there, but as you think about your veteran students, if one of the first words in the word cloud that pops up for you is disability or mental health, be very cautious, because you're falling into a common trap, which is the sort of media-driven narrative that everybody who serves is one of two things. The right loves to believe, the political right, it's a political question, the political right loves to believe that every veteran is a hero. That no matter how ignominious their service, every veteran is a hero. Oh my God, you're a hero, right? Bah. And then the left, the political left, loves to believe that every veteran who comes out is somehow a broken toy, a victim of an oppressive patriarchal system, right? And neither one are true. At the same time, maybe portions of both are true. So if those words, hero, disability, mental health, pop up in your personal word cloud, be very cautious about where those words come from and think more deeply about that. So I'll just leave that there. Most student veterans will have some degree of disability, at least partially because if they manifest with some kind of disability, then that opens them up to get VA educational benefits as well as their regular old GI Bill, which is quite lucrative. So there's some financial compensation. There's actually a term for this, it's called financial compensation neurosis. Not great, but there it is. So I wanted to say that's a problem, but in addition to that problem, I wanted to offer two opportunities, or two positive things that we can think about. We know this, minority veterans are much better off in society than minority non-veterans. And I'm not just talking about racial minorities, although that's also true. Black veteran unemployment, much lower than black non-veteran unemployment. Women's unemployment, much lower, like on and on. No matter which minority you look at, the minority veterans are doing better than minority non-veterans, including people who are sexual minorities, right? LGBT community or allies. Those folks have lower bad outcomes than their non-veteran ones. And there's a couple of reasons for that. It could be any one of three or maybe a fourth reason. One is that the military training itself is valuable and has transferability to some sorts of civilian occupations. So getting up, putting your pants on, being at work on time, those are important skills to thrive in the marketplace. So military training, and then specific military skills. You learn to be a truck driver and then you transfer that over. So maybe that's one. Another one is something, and this is a very powerful effect that you should know about. It's called the healthy warrior effect. So veterans are healthier on average and more educated on average than non-veterans. And part of that is to get into the military in the first place, you need to be healthy and pretty well educated. You need to have at least a high school diploma, some services at some time frames except a GED. Not many do. And you also can't be a felon, except in the Army during the height of their war in Iraq, so, for instance. But anyway, so there's a healthy warrior effect. People with high social or human capital are able to get into the military, and then that transfers into their future employment as well. So healthy warrior effect. And then the last one I'd just say is an opportunity effect. So if you've served, coming to a school like AU is low cost or free, right? If you have not, coming to AU is however expensive we are, like really high. So there's opportunity those folks have for higher education, for higher achievement that results potentially in them having better long-term outcomes in the marketplace. So that's opportunity number one. Minority and other kinds of veterans have better outcomes due to one of those three effects or some other one. And then finally, your veteran students, this is something to be aware of. Your veteran students, I think broadly, with some exceptions, fit into one of two categories. One, they're self-motivated, they're excited about being there, they're ready to take those skills to the next level, they're upskilling, they're there on purpose doing the right thing. Or two, and be aware of this, it's some students go to school because they don't know what else to do and because it's lucrative to go to school. So if you're on the GI Bill, you're also getting a large payment per month, especially in DC, on housing. So a good way to pay for your apartment is just enroll in some classes, and you may or may not be fully committed to those classes. So the students are either really great, trying to upskill, working hard, or some of them could be trying to kick the can down the road. And you'd be aware and try to sort of suss that out, like which is which. Somebody mentioned earlier the chasm between civil and military, or civilian and military. There's a bilateral respect and a bilateral disrespect, and for each person it's slightly different. So, you know, military affiliated people view civilians as soft and gentle and, you know, things like that, whereas, you know, civilians view military people as brutish or stupid. Those are obviously that's all wrong, just like any stereotype. You're subject to things like the ecological fallacy and things like that, where just because you've met one brutish military person doesn't mean we're all brutish, you know. So, although, you know, maybe we are. So, anyway, here's what I would say: if you're desiring to know your civilian counterparts, or your military students, sorry, I was thinking about something else. If you desire to know them, I have 5 things that I think are important. One, there's a great book by Sebastian Junger called Tribe, and it really describes how as people were conditioned to be in small groups, interdependent, linked together, same mission, from, you know, sort of plains of Africa, hunter-gatherer times, right? And how does that transition into military service, and then what happens to those folks when they get fragmented out and all of a sudden they're by themselves in the civilian context, is a great one. Another book is called The Things They Cannot Say. It's 5 or 6 essays about individual veterans who have radically different experiences, and that's also a great book. Some of them have great experiences, some of them have very negative experiences, but just read to understand what veterans might experience. 3, not all veterans are sick. A lot of us, you know, even people with significant disabilities like I have, my life is actually really much better because of my service than it would have been otherwise, even though I have a super significant mobility problem. Overall, my life is better. Not all veterans are sick, so don't treat them or encourage them to adopt the sick role if you can afford to not do that. Treat them like normal students. You know, if you have a student who's a few years older and he or she is tending to dominate the conversation because they're more confident and because they're type A and everything like that, pull them aside and have a little conversation and say, hey, listen, I'm super thrilled that you are confident and motivated and everything else. We need to help your other peers like come up to speed. So maybe if you could help me, you know, wait 10 seconds before you shoot your hand in the air, that's something that's really good, and they'll respond to being treated like adults as adults because they are. So I'd say treat them like normal students if somebody's, so that. And the last one, and this is huge, I could go on for this for an hour, I'm not going to, be aware of identity shifts. So we all have 20 or 30 identities, and you and I were talking about this before class. Their veteran identity, which they definitely have, especially if they were in for a long time, their veteran identity may or may not be salient to the classroom conversation or topic. So if it's an SIS class about conflict in the Middle East, and it's somebody who fought in Iraq, or, you know, Afghanistan's not in the Middle East, but if they fought in Iraq, then holy cow, maybe their veteran identity will be salient to that conversation. If it's a question about, you know, economic policy and, you know, how broad to get the tax base or something, maybe the veteran context or their veteran identity isn't salient there. So just be aware of where their veteran salience might pop up, and where it matters, use it to your advantage in the classroom. Where it doesn't matter, don't constantly come back to it. Just like you wouldn't come back to a LGBT minority student just because, like, on something that's unrelated to the topics at hand. So to your point about spotlighting, great, totally accurate point. There's sometimes when spotlighting might be appropriate if that identity is becoming salient, and where that identity is not salient, don't worry about it, just move on without it. So they're not always veterans. Sometimes they're just students. Sometimes they're just boys. Sometimes they're just girls. Sometimes they're just, you know, parents or whatever they are. So just be aware of that and be sensitive to it. But I don't think you need to be afraid to teach veterans. I don't think you need to be afraid to work alongside veterans. You know, we're all just, you know, we're all lonely in our own skin at some level. So just love everybody, and I think you'll be all right.
Any other?
Sir?
One thing that you said, does self-value have to do with anything where you're talking about minority veterans versus non-veterans on how they succeed? I don't know, like you have self-worth, right? Like I've served, or the things you've done in the military, in the training, like that's where the confidence comes from. So you get that confidence to go out there and try to do something.
And overcome barriers, things like that. Yeah, I totally buy that. That makes a lot of sense to me. I could add that as a fourth one. Yes, ma'am.
I wanted to ask, and those are very few students I encountered, but there are military/veterans who are not actual military, you know, who may have served in contracting relations, were out, you know, I don't know, reporting, were sort of more exposed. And I sometimes, I can think of one particular one who, you know, how do you approach that? You know, you just kind of put them, lump them in, and, you know, kind of have the same awareness that you just described? Or should we think of them differently? You know, how do they fit in? They do and don't.
I would say, again, you're expressing a needed awareness about the military, meaning there are multiple ways you can serve in the military. The veteran status does not only apply to combat veterans, it does, you know. And so it is about understanding who it is that you're dealing with.
Yeah.
Right? And if it was a combat, you know, environment reporter, you know, some of the same, this is kind of to Dan's point, the context matters because some of their experience may be relevant to that situation.
I would suggest, can I jump in? I would suggest if you read this book, The Things They Cannot Say, Kevin Seitz is the journalist who wrote it, and he has far more combat exposure than I do. Much more combat exposure than I do. I have 5 months of routine daily combat exposure, but he has years of exposure. So he has really significant PTSD. He writes about it openly. It's a really great book. But that's an example of a non-military person with the same kinds of trauma and identity and things that a super heavily exposed combat soldier might experience.
Sonia, I would say within the military, within all the branches, that it's a mission focus. So, you know, people that may not be in combat, I don't, at least in my experience in the Navy, the conversations don't really occur as to whether you were in combat, whether you were exposed, anything like that. We're all there to support the mission. So within the service, it's people that were not in combat situations have extraordinary respect, of course, for those that were, but people that were in combat situations don't disrespect people that weren't, or, you know what I mean? I mean, so for us, it really it's a mission focus. And I think, to Tony's point, the different types of specialties and so forth can manifest some benefit in the classroom, but it would be, you know, it would depend on the person, so.
There's another group much smaller than your typical honorably discharged veteran. I have run into 4 or 5 people in the last, say, 4 years or so who were not honorably discharged. They were not, it's the category between honorable and dishonorable.
Yeah, so the categories of discharge are honorable, general, other than honorable, bad conduct, and dishonorable.
Yeah, this was all.
The bottom 3, you get no veterans benefits at all. It's a huge black strike, and it's typically due to a felony type conviction. But honorable and general are common, and about 10% of people get out the general.
These are all
less than that, about 5%.
And they all struggle, because I'm a career advisor, they struggle with how to deal with that in terms of how to present that to employers, because it immediately raises questions. And so, and my general advice is just don't say what it was, and then if the subject comes up, you have to be ready to talk about it. But these are people who, by and large, don't think very favorably on their military experience for different varying reasons. But in addition to that, the big thing I wanted to say was my experience overall with veterans, anecdotally over the last 11 or 12 years I've been here, is that the vast bulk of them feel very mixed about their military experience. There's some good things, there were some bad things. And we don't get into a conversation of would you do it over again. It's not appropriate. But it generally tends to be pretty mixed feelings. And I don't mean that mixed negative, just mixed. I mean, the only people who tend to be just, hugely positive are people who came away with, a guy who went to the Defense Language Institute in Monterey and got trained up in fluent Arabic, and he was an intelligence officer for several years, and he comes out and he's going to segue right into an intel agency. That was a great experience, right? But most of them aren't that positive about the experience. That's my overall impression, which may not be representative, but that's what I see.
Which actually, I think, sets us up to go into our next topic, because.
We have one more
Nice
hand.
segue.
Do you want to say something? I know you have your hand up.
Yeah, but I don't want to stop the.
No, go ahead. What, Arthur?
I'm just wondering if everyone on the panel or in the room noticed something I've been noticing, which is I find that there's a shift in people's attitudes towards veteran students the further we're getting away from the hot wars, so to speak. There's far fewer people deployed now. There's far fewer people dying, thank God, or getting injured. And so what I'm noticing in my classrooms are, in one sense, the cachet is not there as much. They're not seen as heroes. It's almost like don't know really what to think of you, but I don't see you as this glittering hero. But I also don't see you as much of a damaged person either. It's more of this kind of, I respect you, but I don't really know much about what you're doing.
If that's true, let's welcome it.
Yeah.
Let's
That's what I
welcome
mean.
it, because lionization or victimization are both highly negative, in my view.
I'm sorry, I can add that on this campus, I don't know if anyone has been in the room, that's in the room has been here for, since the mid-90s, but I came here as a Navy lieutenant commander in the mid-90s as a doctoral student, and I was told, and let's just put it out there that the Navy uniform is the best looking uniform. And I was told,
Next to the Marine.
Thank you. Next to the Marine, okay, we're good. But I was told, do not wear that uniform on campus. I was being paid for by the Navy. I was sent here by the Navy to get my doctorate. And I was told, do not wear the uniform on campus, you will not be welcome. And that was a tough day one in this building, in that lobby right down there, having the fear of going back to school, which someone mentioned before, and being told that. And I've seen that change a lot, and I agree with you. If we've gotten to the point where it's just like, that's good, that's cool, that's good. And you did the Peace Corps, that's cool too, great. I mean, that's awesome. So
Let's judge people on their individual merits rather than on their class-based status. But then again, I'm a conservative, so.
Alistair, before we start.
Aren't all military people? No,
Stereotypes! Stop!
Alistair.
But yeah, what you're saying is right. I think just as a student, I'm a student. Right? Like the whole hero worship or victim, whatever it is, that's not what I'm here for. I'm here for an education, and I'm sure like my other fellow vets are here for the education. And when it comes to experience, leave it open. If they want to share, they'll share. It's not something like you said, like pinpoint, because you become defensive on certain things as well. Because as soon as you're expressive, you're express, even if, because like you said, yes, you've lived a certain thing, you've seen a certain thing, right? You become defensive of it. And in SIS, I think you guys are more of a hot topic situation than the film for us.
Why would you do that?
But as a faculty, you have to know how to
Start a class
navigate that
on law.
situation, right? As a faculty member, you have to know how to make sure that everyone has a space to give voice to what they want, think, or experience in the classroom. And so the idea of safe spaces are great, but the idea of starting off a class and saying this is a brave space where we're going to encounter conflict and it's something that's going to be a platform for us to learn from. So we're not here to reinforce or make sure we all agree and we're a happy family when we leave, but we have to leave having learned something from each other and recognizing that learning comes from a brave space where people feel comfortable sharing those ideas that are not the same. And I start every semester off by saying, you are all not going to agree with me, and that's great. I want you to tell me when you don't, and I want you to challenge me. I will learn something from you, but hopefully you will learn much more from each other, right?
And one more thing to add to that like my military service or me being a vet is only one aspect of who I am.
That's right.
Right? But as soon as you're like, oh yeah, you know, like I served or whatever, boom, you're labeled something, and everybody around you, that's all they see. Right? Every time, that's how the point of interaction. I'm very proud of my service, but that's like I'm in that box now. Right? Either, but yeah, so
Yeah.
make sure to allow them to express all their different aspects and shading that they have, so that way whenever they're whenever they're engaging like fellow students, they're not just engaging from that mindset. What you said, your military personality. What was it?
Veteran identity.
Veteran identity.
Yeah.
So that way they break from that and just like look at themselves as more.
So, and Elazar and I have had this conversation sitting in the Veterans Lounge, so it's wonderful, again, to be able to have this larger conversation and you know, share some perspectives. Believe it or not, that also sets us up for a transition to our next topic, right? Because really, the idea, right? The idea is to figure out a way to constructively have people be comfortable with their identities, whatever they are. In this case, we're talking veteran, right? And so one thing, again, kind of Tara mentions, you know, part of it is whether you said good or bad experience. Part of what the military does is train you, right, to be able to execute things precisely. That's the idea, right? We know how to do this, we've done it, and it really can come down to life-death situations. So there's a bit of mindset, like this is about, you know, training for precision. Don't, you know, you're not thinking of a lot about that. And so, again, that's a mindset someone may have, not in a, again, negative or resistant way, but if that's a mindset they have, it will definitely cause some tensions in terms of interaction with students as well as the lesson plan. So, I'm going to kick this over to Sean and Tara to talk to us about how they, the non-veterans, help veterans understand the new environment they're in.
And what we've been talking about is actually a really good way to segue into that in terms of what is that veteran identity. One of the things that we teach a lot here at AU, one of the things that's been a major source of discussion on campus is our concepts of having inclusive excellence, diversity and inclusion. A big part of that is understanding people's intersectional identities. You have different identities, you have different things that you bring to the table at different times that come up in different ways. And a big part of that could be your veteran experience that is, like he was saying, it comes up for certain topics and then not at all for certain others. I'm not kidding when I say I have to start a class on Thursday night on international law. And I know that the first thing I need to do is go, so this is the Geneva Convention. Because 2/3 of the people in the room think that's going to be the most important thing because of what happened last week. And then I've also got to go, and we're going to talk about climate change, and we're going to talk about where you draw maritime borders. Because that's really important for who gets the gas resources that you can go drill for. Yeah, that's the South China Sea. Congratulations, here we go. There are different identities and different things that we need to engage with. And because I do primarily undergraduates, the training for precision execution really can come up against some stuff for the faculty member where we are talking about trying to get people to think critically. And my veteran students I have seen them say, I'm thinking critically about an end result. Tell me how that applies. And some of what I need them to do is think critically about how that affects your worldview. And that sort of open-ended question, that sort of amorphous gray area, that's that fuzzy thinking. It's like, well, fuzzy thinking is what you need to be able to do to be more creative, to then come up with a more concrete solution. Let me get, and I have to walk them through it, but we get there. They are open to if there is learning. It is a process. It is a process that we have to do not just with our veteran students, and I don't try and ever do the spotlighting unless a student themselves say, I would like to talk about and bring up their experience. To the extent that I know that I have a veteran student or an active duty personnel student in the classroom, if I can have a conversation with them offline and say, I want to respect your service, I want you to know that your point of view is welcome, but I'm not requiring you to bring it out. If you just don't want to talk about that, that's fine. If there's something I think needs to be talked about, I can talk about it. I get the benefit of being able to tell my students, I am also a lawyer, and so I will argue literally any point of view in the room against you to make sure you know what you're talking about it and that you have that your argument is solid. And I had a student challenge me on that one time. I said, fine, let's do it. I'm North Korea. Let's go. And the class loved it, particularly since that particular student had been talking maybe more than they wanted to. I'll take North Korea, sure. Let's go.
Did you take Rodman too?
There's so much to unpack.
He's got issues.
But that's sort of where I'm coming from in terms of this redefining the mission, getting all of my students to come out of whatever that box is that they think they're in and say, I need you to see other people's boxes. I need you to be able to do that cognitive empathy, being able to see how someone else is seeing the world. Because otherwise you don't know how to respond effectively to it. If you don't know what the cultural values are of the people who are on the other side of that table, you're not negotiating right.
So I have just a few quick comments to just kind of help us wrap things up. And so for me, my observations have come more from what to do in the classroom or how to support veteran or military affiliated students in an academic environment. And so we've talked about kind of the difference between training and education, right? And when coming from a training environment into an education environment, the expectations we have can be very different. It can be very different and provide some challenges when it comes to collaboration, when it comes to decision making, which is something that is carried out very differently in a military organization than it may in a group project in a classroom. So if we think about decision making, if we think about the time it takes us to arrive at a consensus, if we're working on a project with a group, a lot of those things can cause tension among students. We move kind of from a very collectivist environment where we're all looking out for each other to one where higher education is really very individualistic, and that we're all kind of making sure we get a good grade and that we're noticed by the faculty member and that everyone is getting the education that they feel they deserve. So it's a big mind shift in many ways. From a faculty perspective, I'm also very cognizant of how I design my assignments so that they don't require any one person in the room to self-identify in a way that they might not want to. A lot of our assignments or a lot of the conversation around diversity and inclusion is how can we bring in students' prior knowledge and connect them to the material, and how do we make sure that we're creating a diverse and inclusive environment. And I support all of those initiatives, but at the same point in time, I think it's really important as a faculty member to make sure that I'm not crafting assignments that require students to self-divulge traumatic experiences or events or identities that they don't want to, which may put them in the spotlight, which is what you mentioned earlier, right? So I think that's really important. The other thing real quickly, and I'll just wrap up with this, shifting from training to learning or education, is really the idea of structure and routine. So I think many of our military affiliated students, my husband included, I'm married to a military veteran, and I watched him go through his own master's program, and I watched him struggle with getting things done on time or scheduling things for himself or not having a clear routine. So anytime as a faculty member we can scaffold something for students in the classroom, not only do I think it helps this population, I think it helps all students, right? If we can do some scaffolding when it comes to larger assignments, maybe have smaller things, delivered or, do throughout the semester. Maybe it's something as simple as putting up the agenda, whether it's online in an online classroom or on the whiteboard before you start a class to let students know where we're going, and giving them a sense of what that class is going to entail. So any way we can think about structuring or creating a routine, starting the class off every day by saying, okay, who has questions about the readings, right? They know what's coming next. So I think transitioning from one to the other sometimes poses challenges as well when we think about the idea of routine and structure. And any way we can infuse our classes with that, I think it's beneficial, not just for military affiliated students, but for the majority of our students in class. And Tony, I'll just leave it at that.
All right, well, look, as we said, that's the meat of our discussion. There are a couple of things I'm going to go through very quickly in our last couple of minutes. But as we mentioned, as we've all been talking about, student veterans, military affiliate types have a number of things that they're dealing with. So again, running a track meet and juggling real-time challenges are something that apply. I do want to this is a starting point of a conversation here on this campus. I want to share a couple of things that we can all feel very good about. I mentioned the Student Veterans of America group, which Alazar is the head of our chapter. We also happen to have the chief of staff of that group is Will Hubbard, who's a 2011 AU Vet alum, and he's the chief of staff of that group. He was also awarded with the Rising Star Alum Award this past year. So we have instances where we clearly have had student veterans come to AU, do well here, and go on to awesome things. So we are building a good working relationship with Will so he can help continue some of the things that he did when he was here as a student. Also, we have something called a Veteran Liaison Network. It's going to be informed by these types of discussions. It really is set up to help inform people about the best ways to advise. Brian's on it from the Career Center standpoint. Your engagement here is going to help us to make this be a better resource, not only for the students, but for us. This group is intended to help us grapple with some of these questions and understand the best way that the university can support students. The last thing is this group here, a mixture of faculty and staff. We are forming a veteran faculty and staff affinity group, not with a particular objective of something that might happen in the classroom or whatever, but for us to support each other. Share this knowledge, help us be the best we can be in what we do, so that then is a strong contribution to the AU community. And that's it. So you do not have to be a veteran, a military person in particular. If you are a veteran ally, you can be a part of this veteran faculty and staff affinity group. So look for the opportunity for the word to come out. And if you'd like to be part of this type of a conversation, join us and we'll continue to make some good things happen. Thank you all for being here with us.
Thanks for facilitating.
Yeah, thank you.
My pleasure, my pleasure. I can't believe I got this group together. Like, you guys are good.